He bought an old barn for 50 cents, then found what no rancher dared to touch. Everett Cain stood in the dusty town square, holding his last 50 cents, while the wealthiest ranchers in the territory laughed at him. The auction had just ended, and somehow, impossibly, he had won the bid on Widow Henderson's abandoned barn. Sterling Maddox wiped tears from his eyes, still chuckling, but none of them understood what Everett had noticed during his brief inspection the week before. The barn sat crooked on its foundation, weathered boards hanging loose like broken teeth. Every rancher had walked past it, dismissing it as worthless. But Everett had seen something they hadn't, something that made his hand shake as he counted his meager coins. The way the morning light hit the back wall revealed marks that shouldn't exist on ordinary wood, scratches that formed a pattern that meant everything to someone who knew how to read the signs his grandfather had taught him. As the crowd dispersed, still muttering about the foolish young man who threw away his last coins, Everett approached his purchase. The rusty key felt heavy in his palm. Behind him, he could hear Sterling Maddox telling his associates that some people never learned their place. But when Everett inserted the key and heard the lock click open, something inside the barn shifted, a sound like settling wood, but different, intentional. The door swung open with a groan that seemed to echo longer than it should. Inside, shafts of sunlight revealed an interior that defied the barn's broken exterior. And there, in the far corner, where shadows gathered thickest, something waited that no rancher in the territory had been brave enough to investigate, something that would either destroy Everett Cain forever or prove that sometimes the greatest treasures hide in the places others fear to look. The barn's interior defied every expectation, while the outside walls showed decades of neglect. The inside revealed something entirely different. The floorboards, though dusty, were solid oak that had been carefully maintained. Support beams stood straight and true, bearing no signs of the rot that should have claimed them years ago. Everett stepped inside, his boots echoing in the vast space. The sound seemed wrong somehow, too clear and resonant for a structure that appeared ready to collapse. He moved toward the back wall, where he had glimpsed those strange markings from outside. Up close, they were even more puzzling. Carved into the wood were symbols he recognized from his grandfather's teachings about the old mining claims. Not random scratches, but deliberate marks, indicating something valuable hidden nearby. His heart began to race as he traced the patterns with his finger. These were surveyor's marks, the kind used to identify mineral deposits or water sources, but they were carved inside the barn, which meant whoever placed them wanted to keep the information secret. Every rancher in the territory had walked past this barn for years, seeing only decay and worthlessness. "Foolish boy," Sterling Maddox's voice cut through the afternoon air. Everett turned to find the wealthy rancher standing in the doorway, his expensive hat casting shadows across his weathered face. "Throwing away your last coins on this pile of rotting wood. You could have used that money for a decent meal." Everett stepped away from the wall, careful not to reveal what he had been examining. Sometimes what looks worthless on the surface holds the greatest value underneath, Mr. Maddox. Sterling laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the barn walls. "Value. The only value here is in teaching you a lesson about knowing your place. This barn has stood empty for good reason. Even Widow Henderson was glad to be rid of it." As Sterling turned to leave, He paused. "Mark my words, Cain. Some things are left alone for good reason. Smart men learn to recognize when they're in over their heads." The warning hung in the air long after his footsteps faded. But Sterling's warning only strengthened Everett's resolve. He had seen something the others had missed, something that could change everything. The question was whether he possessed the courage to uncover what previous owners had kept hidden. The afternoon sun slanted through the gaps in the walls, illuminating dust motes that danced like secrets waiting to be revealed. Somewhere in this barn lay the answer to why no rancher had dared to truly investigate what they so quickly dismissed. That evening, Everett sat outside the small cabin he rented at the edge of town, studying his grandfather's old journal by lamplight. The leather-bound book contained decades of surveyor's knowledge, including sketches of symbols used to mark significant discoveries. His hands trembled as he found the exact patterns he had seen carved in the barn wall. According to his grandfather's notes, those specific marks indicated a water source of exceptional quality and volume. Not just any water, but the kind that could sustain cattle through the harshest droughts. In this territory, where water rights determined wealth and power, such a discovery would be worth more than all of Sterling Maddox's holdings combined. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Violet McCall stood at his door, her simple dress modest but clean, her eyes holding the intelligence that most people overlooked. She was the only person in town who had ever shown him genuine kindness. "Evening, Everett. I heard about your purchase today. The whole town's talking." She settled into the chair beside him, careful not to glance at his journal. "My father says you're either brave or foolish. He hasn't decided which yet. What do you think?" Everett closed the journal carefully, not wanting to reveal its contents. "I think you see things others don't. Remember when you warned us about that storm last spring? Everyone said you were imagining things until the hail destroyed half the crops." She studied his face in the lamplight. "You found something in that barn, didn't you?" Everett's silence was answer enough. Violet leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Be careful, Everett. There are people in this town who don't want anyone else to succeed, especially someone they consider beneath them." Before he could respond, she continued, "Sterling Maddox came by our place tonight, asked a lot of questions about you, wanted to know about your family, your background. My father told him to mind his own business, but she hesitated. Sterling seemed very interested in why you would spend your last coins on something everyone else considered worthless." The weight of her words settled over them. If Sterling was already suspicious, it meant Everett had less time than he thought. Whatever lay hidden near that barn, he needed to find it before others caught wind of his discovery. "There's something else," Violet added, her voice barely audible. "Widow Henderson asked to speak with me before she left town. She said to tell whoever bought the barn that her husband didn't abandon it by choice. He was forced to stop working there." The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to form a picture, but it was one that suggested danger lurked closer than Everett had imagined. Dawn broke gray and cold as Everett made his way back to the barn, carrying his grandfather's surveying tools in a worn leather satchel. The compass and measuring chains had helped locate water sources across 3 territories, and today they would either confirm his suspicions or prove him a fool. Inside the barn, He began following the carved symbols methodically. Each mark corresponded to a direction and distance measurement in his grandfather's system. The pattern led him in a spiral from the back wall toward the center of the structure. As he worked, sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air. The final symbol pointed directly downward. Everett knelt and began scraping away decades of accumulated dirt and hay from the barn floor. His knife blade struck something solid, not wood, not stone, but metal. His pulse quickened as he cleared away more debris, revealing the edge of an iron cover roughly 3 feet square. The cover bore the same surveyor's marks as the wall, along with an inscription that made his breath catch, E. M. Henderson, 1847. God's blessing runs deep. This wasn't just any water source. This was an artesian well, the kind that produced fresh water continuously without pumping. In a territory where droughts could last for months, such a well was more valuable than gold. Heavy footsteps approached the barn. Everett quickly scattered hay over his discovery and stood as Sterling Maddox entered, this time accompanied by 2 of his ranch hands. The men positioned themselves near the doorway while Sterling advanced with a predatory smile. "Funny thing, Cain. I've been thinking about your little purchase. Seems odd that a man with no money would spend his last coins on something worthless, unless, of course, it isn't worthless." Sterling's eyes swept the barn interior with new interest. "Makes a man wonder what you might have seen that the rest of us missed." Everett forced his voice to remain steady. "Sometimes a man buys something just to have a place to call his own, even if it's falling apart. Is that so?" Sterling walked to the back wall, his fingers tracing the same carved symbols Everett had followed. "These are interesting decorations. Almost look like some kind of marks. You wouldn't happen to know what they mean, would you?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Everett realized that Sterling knew more than he had let on. Perhaps he had always known about the well, but lacked the knowledge to interpret the symbols. Now he suspected Everett possessed that knowledge. Just old carvings. Previous owner probably got bored during long winter nights. Sterling's smile turned cold. "You know, Cain, I've decided I might have been too hasty in letting this property go so cheap. I'm prepared to offer you $5 for it. That's 10 times what you paid. Quite generous for a pile of rotting wood." But Everett had seen the hunger in Sterling's eyes, the way his hands trembled slightly as he examined the symbols. This wasn't generosity. This was desperation, disguised as kindness. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Maddox, but I'm not interested in selling." Everett's words echoed in the barn's hollow interior, each syllable carrying more defiance than he felt. Sterling's facade of friendliness cracked like dried leather. "Not interested, boy? You don't seem to understand your situation. This territory operates on respect and understanding. Men like me protect men like you, provided you know your place." The ranch hands stepped closer, their hands resting casually on the handles of their working knives. Not a direct threat, but clear enough. Everett felt sweat trickle down his spine as he calculated the distance to the door. "I understand plenty, Mr. Maddox. I understand that you're mighty interested in something you claimed was worthless yesterday." Everett's grandfather had taught him that when cornered, sometimes the only option was to stand taller. "Makes a man wonder why you brought help to make a simple business offer." Sterling's face flushed red above his collar. "You impudent whelp! Do you have any idea who you're talking to? I own more land than you could walk across in a week. I provide jobs for half this town. And you, a nobody with nothing, think you can talk back to me?" Everett's voice grew stronger with each word. "And, from what I can see, you earn yours through fear, not merit." The larger ranch hand moved forward, but Sterling raised a hand to stop him. His eyes never left Everett's face. "You're making a serious mistake, Cain. This territory has ways of dealing with people who don't understand their place. Accidents happen. Barns catch fire. Young men disappear looking for work in distant territories. Is that what happened to Mr. Henderson? An accident that made him stop working on his own property?" The question hit its mark. Sterling's composure slipped for just a moment, revealing something ugly beneath. "Henderson was a weak man who didn't appreciate the protection I offered him. He chose to leave rather than accept reasonable terms for a partnership." Now Everett understood. Sterling hadn't just known about the well. He had tried to force Henderson into giving him access to it. When Henderson refused, Sterling had made life difficult enough that the family abandoned their claim entirely. "Well, Mr. Maddox, I'm not Mr. Henderson, and I won't be intimidated into giving up what's rightfully mine." Everett stepped back toward the wall, his hand finding the rough wood for support. "Now, unless you have legal business here, I suggest you leave my property." The silence stretched between them like a bowstring. Sterling's jaw worked soundlessly before he finally spoke. "You've made your choice, Cain. Remember that when the consequences come calling." As the three men filed out of the barn, Everett's knees nearly buckled with relief, but Sterling's parting words echoed ominously in the empty space. The real battle was just beginning. That night, Everett couldn't sleep. Every shadow outside his cabin window seemed to move with purpose. Every sound carried the weight of potential threat. Sterling's words echoed in his mind. Accidents happen, barns catch fire. He needed to act quickly, but one man against Sterling's influence seemed impossible odds. As dawn approached, he made a decision that went against every instinct for self-preservation. Instead of hiding his discovery, he would expose it. If Sterling wanted to operate through fear and secrecy, Everett would counter with truth and witnesses. He dressed quickly and made his way to the general store, arriving just as old Thomas Whitman was opening for business. Thomas had lived in the territory longer than anyone, and more importantly, he owed no debts to Sterling Maddox. "Thomas, I need to speak with you about something important, something that affects the whole town." The elderly merchant studied Everett's face with sharp eyes. "You look like a man carrying heavy news, son. Come inside before the gossip starts gathering." Inside the store, surrounded by barrels of flour and shelves of dry goods, Everett explained everything: the symbols, the well, Sterling's threats, and the truth about what happened to the Henderson family. Thomas listened without interruption, his weathered hands folded across his apron. "Always wondered why Henderson left so sudden-like," Thomas muttered. "Good man, hard worker. Didn't make sense for him to abandon a working farm." He looked up at Everett with newfound respect. "Takes courage to stand up to Sterling. Most folks just find it easier to look the other way." "I need witnesses, Thomas. People who can verify what I found before Sterling finds a way to take it from me." Thomas nodded slowly. There's a Territorial surveyor due through town next week. Man named Collins, who works for the land office. If he documents your discovery officially, even Sterling can't dispute the legal claim. But even as hope flickered in Everett's chest, Thomas's expression grew troubled. Of course, that's assuming you can keep your barn standing for another week. Sterling's not known for his patience when he wants something. As if summoned by their conversation, commotion erupted outside. Through the store window, they watched Sterling ride past with 6 of his men, all armed and heading in the direction of Everett's barn. The message was clear. Sterling was done with subtle threats. "He's moving faster than I expected," Thomas said grimly. "That means he's more desperate than we thought. Question is, what are you prepared to do about it?" Everett checked his grandfather's old rifle, making sure it was loaded. "Whatever it takes to protect what's mine. My grandfather always said that a man who won't fight for his rights doesn't deserve them." But as he prepared to leave, Thomas grabbed his arm. "There's something else you should know about that well, son. Something Henderson told me before he left town. The water that comes from it, it's not just good for drinking." Thomas's words hung in the air. As he continued, "Henderson said that water has minerals in it that make the soil richer than anywhere else in the territory. Crops grow twice as fast, cattle put on weight better, horses get stronger coats. That well isn't just about surviving drought, son. It's about creating the most productive ranch in 3 territories." The full scope of what Everett had discovered hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't just valuable property. It was the key to transforming the entire region's agriculture. No wonder Sterling was willing to use violence to claim it. Everett thanked Thomas and headed toward his barn, his mind racing with possibilities and dangers. As he crested the hill overlooking his property, his worst fears were confirmed. Sterling's men had surrounded the barn, and smoke was beginning to rise from one corner of the structure. "No!" The word tore from his throat as he spurred his horse forward. He arrived to find Sterling standing calmly beside his horse while his men used torches to set fire to the barn's exterior walls. The flames were spreading quickly, fed by the dry wood and decades of accumulated hay. "Terrible shame," Sterling called out as Everett dismounted. "These old buildings are such fire hazards. Lucky thing no one was inside when it caught fire all by itself." Everett raised his rifle, but Sterling's men immediately drew their weapons in response. 6 guns against 1 left no room for heroics. All he could do was watch his discovery burn. "You bastard! That barn was legally mine." "Was," Sterling replied with satisfaction. "Amazing how quickly property values can change. But don't worry, Cain. I'm still prepared to offer you fair compensation. Let's say $2 for the land. More than generous for a burned-out lot." The flames reached the roof, sending sparks spiraling into the afternoon sky. Years of Henderson's work, the carefully preserved symbols, the evidence of the well's location, all of it disappearing into smoke and ash. But as Everett watched his hopes burn, something unexpected happened. The fire reached the center of the barn, where the iron well cover lay hidden beneath debris. The intense heat caused the metal to expand and shift, and suddenly a geyser of crystal-clear water erupted through the flames. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Water shot 20 feet into the air, dousing the fire and sending Sterling's men scrambling backward in surprise. The Artesian well, under pressure for decades, had finally found release. Sterling's face went white as he watched a fortune in water cascading down from the sky. "Impossible," he whispered, but the evidence was undeniable. "Seems like God has a sense of justice after all," Everett said, lowering his rifle as he realized the fire had actually helped his cause. "Now, the whole territory can see exactly what you tried to steal." People from town were already riding toward the spectacle, drawn by the smoke, and now staying for the miracle of water flowing freely in the desert. Within an hour, half the territory had gathered around Everett's property. The water continued to flow steadily from the ground where the barn had stood, creating a growing pool that reflected the afternoon sun like liquid silver. Word spread quickly through the crowd about what Sterling had attempted to do. Thomas Vittman arrived with the Territorial land records, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd. According to these documents, Everett Cain is the legal owner of this property and everything on it, including mineral and water rights. Any attempt to claim otherwise is theft under territorial law. Sterling's men shifted uncomfortably, realizing they had been witnessed committing arson in front of dozens of people. Their boss's face had turned from white to red as he watched his carefully laid plans crumble like ash in the wind. "This is ridiculous," Sterling sputtered. "The boy bought a worthless barn for $50. He can't possibly have legal claim to water rights worth thousands of dollars." "Actually, he can." The new voice belonged to Surveyor Collins, who had arrived in town 3 days early and witnessed the entire confrontation. "I've been documenting illegal water claim disputes across 3 territories. This is exactly the kind of situation that requires official intervention." Collins approached the flowing water and began taking measurements with his professional instruments. "This is clearly an artesian well of significant capacity. According to territorial law, water rights belong to the legal property owner regardless of the purchase price." Violet McCall pushed through the crowd to stand beside Everett, her presence lending him strength as he faced down Sterling's glare. "My father and the other small ranchers have been talking," she said quietly. "They're tired of being bullied into unfair deals. Your discovery has given them courage to stand up for themselves." The crowd's mood was shifting decisively against Sterling. People who had remained silent during years of his intimidation tactics were now speaking openly about his methods. The attempt to burn down Everett's barn had been the final straw that broke their fear. Sterling realized his position was untenable. His men were vastly outnumbered. His actions had been witnessed by official territorial representatives, and public opinion had turned against him completely. For the first time in years, Sterling Maddox found himself powerless. "This isn't over, Cain," he growled. But the threat carried no weight. Everyone could see that it was indeed over. As Sterling and his men rode away in defeat, the crowd began to celebrate. Everett had not only secured his own future, but had broken Sterling's stranglehold on the territory's water resources. "So, what happens now?" Violet asked, as they watched the clear water flow across the sun-baked ground. Everett looked around at the faces of people who had never shown him respect before, now looking at him with admiration and gratitude. "Now we build something better than what was here before." 6 months later, Everett Cain stood in the middle of what had become the most prosperous ranch in the territory. The Artesian well now supplied water to a network of irrigation channels that fed not only his land, but also the smaller farms of his neighbors. The mineral-rich water had transformed the region exactly as Henderson had claimed, producing crops and livestock that were the envy of distant territories. Sterling Maddox had left the territory entirely after facing charges of arson and attempted theft of water rights. His former holdings had been divided among the settlers he had previously oppressed, creating a community of small farmers rather than one man's empire. Everett had built his house on the hill overlooking the well, and from his front porch he could see children playing near the water's edge, while their parents worked fields that had never been more fertile. The sound of flowing water had become the heartbeat of a thriving community. Violet approached from the direction of town, carrying a letter that bore official territorial seals. "The governor's response to your proposal," she said, settling beside him on the porch steps. Everett opened the letter with hands that no longer trembled with uncertainty. The territorial government had approved his plan to establish a cooperative water-sharing agreement that would prevent any single person from controlling the region's water resources in the future. Henderson would be proud, Violet observed, watching the water flow steadily from the ground that had once seemed worthless. His discovery is helping people he never even met. Sometimes the greatest treasures are the ones we share rather than hoard, Everett replied, thinking of how different his life might have been if he had kept the well's existence secret. As the sun set over their transformed land, painting the flowing water gold and crimson, Everett reflected on how a 50-cent purchase had changed not just his life, but the lives of everyone in the territory. The barn was gone, but what it had protected continued to give life to the community that had grown around it. "You know what the strangest part is?" he said to Violet as they watched their neighbor's children splash in the pool the well had created. "I never would have found the courage to dig if Sterling hadn't threatened me. His greed forced me to be braver than I thought possible." Violet smiled and took his hand. "Maybe that's the real treasure you found in that old barn. Not the water, but the strength to stand up for what was right." The water continued to flow as darkness settled over the land, a constant reminder that sometimes the greatest discoveries come to those who dare to see value where others see only worthlessness. Everett Cain had bought a barn for 50 cents and found a future worth more than he could have ever imagined. That's the end of this incredible story of courage and discovery. If you enjoyed watching Everett transform his life and community, click on another one of our amazing Western tales on screen now. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more inspiring stories, and consider leaving a super chat to help us bring you more incredible adventures from the Old West. Your support means everything, too.